to Dialogue Across Difference, an event series hosted by the Center for the Study of Politics and Governance at the University of Minnesota's Humphrey School of Public Affairs. Join us as Center Director Larry Jacobs and guests engage in conversations across the political and policy spectrum on issues of the day.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Humphrey School and this exciting program. I'm Professor Larry Jacobs. I am a professor here at the University of Minnesota's Humphrey School of Public Affairs. And I want to welcome you to today's program, Conservative Domestic Agenda with Robert Doar and Vin Weber. It's part of our Conservative Voices series, which is committed to highlighting and bringing in prominent conservative thinkers and public officials, and serves the center's mission of encouraging and promoting civic dialogue across differences. And it looks like we have plenty of differences in America today. I want to just invite you, encourage you, implore you to participate today by submitting questions. If you're following us online, you'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button. That's where you can send us your questions, and we're going to get to, as I said, as many as we possibly can. You'll also see at the bottom of the screen that there is a live captioning option if you'd like that. Okay, let's jump in. Robert Doar, who's our guest today, is president of the American Enterprise Institute. AEI, as it's known, is one of the nation's oldest and most respected conservative policy think tanks. In addition, Mr. Doar has quite a lot of experience at the state level, particularly in New York City and New York State, working on policies aimed at those who are poor and government assistance for them. So he's a guy who's had real experience on the ground. He's also published quite a storm. I've spent a good bit of my time reading up and reminding myself of many of the things that he's written. And I'm also joined by Vin Weber, who's a well-known former member of Congress from Minnesota, a political commentator, and lobbyist in Washington, D.C. Vin, thanks so much for joining us.
Larry, thank you very much. Welcome to everybody, and online or not. And Robert, welcome to Minnesota. We're so glad to have you here. You told me before we started you've actually been here before, so we can't say this is your first invitation to the Humphrey, but we're glad and we hope you come back.
I'm very glad to be here, and thanks both Larry and Vin for having me, and for the university community for welcoming me so nicely. Just a little bit about AEI. You know, we're a community of about 125 scholars, some part-time, many full-time. We're involved in the public debate every day in a variety of things. We publish maybe 10 or 15 things a day. We are what you would call right of center, although all of our scholars are independent players. And so we have some Democrats and we have some people that don't see it exactly the way the rest of us do, but we allow them to participate in the public debate in a free and open way and an effective way. We have a pretty active government relations team and a pretty active communications team that make sure our work gets distributed around the country. And we are effective. So we're a think tank that wants to not only put out good ideas and good commentary from our variety of our scholars, but also have that commentary and ideas have impact on public policy. The other little thing I did want to just say is I was the Commissioner of Social Services in New York State for Governor Pataki, and then the Commissioner of Social Services in New York City for Michael Bloomberg. So unlike some other people that talk about the issues concerning our lowest income Americans, I actually have run the programs. I've run the SNAP program, I've run the Medicaid program, I've run the TANF program, run the Child Support Enforcement program in a very large city, and also for a state that had a very rural population as well. So while I was recruited to AEI 10 years ago to bring that experience to the public policy discussion in Washington, I ran a poverty studies program at AEI that I set up, brought a few more scholars, we were participating in the public debate. And then 5 years later, they asked me to become president. And I've been doing that. And the bad part about that is that when you're the poverty scholar and you're talking about issues concerning lowest income Americans, it's your discipline. It's what you know. As president of AEI, I'm often put in a situation where I have to pretend I know a lot about a lot of things. That's a little harder, but I'm getting there. And then the one last thing is I am very familiar with this part of the country. My father grew up in New Richmond, which is just right across the river, the St. Croix River. He is a graduate of St. Paul Academy. And so I know this part of America, and I love it. And I love being in this part of the country. So thanks for having me back.
Oh, why don't we get, by the way, that's great that you're familiar with Wisconsin. I wouldn't emphasize it too much in Minnesota.
Well, that's what we don't like about Minnesota.
Why don't we get into the poverty issue? I'm not any kind of an expert. You are an expert, but way back when Jack Kemp was running for president, and I was the co-chairman of his campaign. I was involved with Jack for many, many years and still miss him. But that was the last time that I can really remember a serious political leader on the right believing in that poverty and inner city problems and problems of low income people had to be a priority. And he talked about, he tried to find solutions. Enterprise zones was one of his ideas. I think that's now probably turned into opportunity zones. Welfare reform was something else, which we should talk about later. But what's the status of thinking? I don't want, not the status of poverty necessarily. What's the status of thinking about poverty in the center right?
So I don't want to do a history lesson, but there were others. Speaker Gingrich, yourself played a role. There were others who on the right that did raise these issues, that there was a failure of the Great Society efforts to help people move up that needed to be addressed. But the evolution since then, and since the passage of the Welfare Reform Act and various other things, is that right now the divide in America on this issue centers around an entitlement to a cash benefit, which is the left's version of how we should help people, and an expectation of work and employment as the best path out of poverty and for raising children in a way that will lead to their greatest opportunity for success. The big news in the world that I live in came from Raj Chetty just a couple months ago. He put out a paper, which he actually pre-released with us at a conference that he did with us, which was kind of him, that showed that when you look at especially African-American children, if they are raised in a community where there are a lot of workers, they are much more likely to move up and have higher income by the time they're 30. It's also true that if they're raised in a community where there are a lot of married two-parent families, it's much more likely that they will move up and be successful. And that is when you say the right, and the scholars that work at AEI and others that I know, those two principles are very fundamental. And they are in contrast to what is a kind of obsession with just sending money into households, regardless of whether they work, and without any really attention to the situation that there may be an absent parent or a non-present parent. And so that's where we are. I would just say one other thing that is true and I think is underappreciated by, frankly, everybody, and that is that if you do work, there's a bipartisan consensus that we should provide aid to people who work who don't make enough to support a family. We have a very large earned income tax credit program in the United States. It's a fact that has been sponsored and supported. It was created by a right of center person. That's a bipartisan policy. We have a very generous food assistance program. The SNAP program, which I ran in New York, is enormous amount of aid goes to low-income working families. We provide other childcare assistance. We provide housing assistance. But to the extent that we're providing aid to people who are, and also public health insurance. I mean, when I was in New York City, I worked for Bill Bloomberg. I was a successor in the administration of Mayor Giuliani. We had a right of center perspective. I worked for a Republican governor. Prior to Obamacare, we had achieved an uninsured rate for children in New York City of less than 5%, which is virtually universal coverage. So again, the point of that was that we were doing it in a way that extended that kind of government assistance to supplement wages where there was work in the household. And that, I think, is something we do quite a lot of, and we do successfully. And if you count all of that aid and add the earnings, you find that when it comes to material hardship, we've really reduced poverty dramatically, properly measured. And most scholars on both sides agree with that. The problem is we haven't given people the human capital and the skills and the ability to move up and be able to earn a middle-class wage that allows them to not necessarily combine earnings plus benefits. But my view is earnings plus benefits helps you get out of poverty and has been something we've both agreed to. So that's a long answer, but to and the only thing I would just say in that is it's pretty well found that if you give money to households who don't work, or who are working, but it's not required, it's not contingent on their work, they will work less. And that's not good for low-income households. It's not good for children raised in single-parent households. It's better, in my judgment, to have employment and an engagement in the community, the dignity of a job. There are health benefits that come from work. And I just think that if you're going to propose policies in Washington that are going to have an effect on low-income households, the last thing you want to do is propose a policy which will reduce labor force participation for struggling families. And that's a firm belief.
I think that's an important point to talk about just a little bit more, because we're hearing a lot of talk about work requirements again now. I see my friend Larry Kudlow on Fox Business Channel talks about it all the time. And the other side, the left, generally says that's punitive. It's stereotyping poor people as being lazy. And they forget that when in the 1990s, when Clinton actually signed work requirements in the welfare reform bill, there was a bipartisan consensus, not universal, but definitely bipartisan, that the lack of work requirements in the welfare programs were destroying particularly the Black family.
I think that's correct. And I think that's what led to welfare reform and led to work requirements in that one program.
Okay.
And that one program is an important program because it's the one federal program that provides cash aid through the states and localities in what was the AFDC program and now is the TANF program. The work requirement discussion in other programs is not going that well. You want to know the fact that Republicans don't put that much effort into it. We do, I do, but SNAP is pretty absent of work expectations. Medicaid has very limited work expectations. Housing is not that good. But having that one fundamental cash program have a work requirement has been, I think, successful. I think that's pretty well established. What is undermining that and what the big debate is, and it's a little bit deceptive to the average American, which I find irritating, is this discussion of child tax credits. Because child tax credits, when you hear it, it sounds like a tax credit or a tax break for a tax-paying family, an earning family, who has children in it. And we want to help those families get over the very hard financial burdens and responsibilities that come with having children. But we have a child tax credit for working families already, the EITC. We have a bigger one also, there's the child tax credit for working families. What we don't have, and what President Biden and the Democrats have wanted to have, is a child tax credit that is really a cash subsidy to non-working families. And during the COVID period, it went out in monthly checks, and it had no recognition of whether people worked. There was no work expectation, no requirement that you reported earnings in order to return it. And that was not a benefit for working families. That was a return to the old welfare system that provided cash without any expectation of work. And I think that was damaging and needed to be stopped. And just the story of it is, we persuaded AEI and many others, Joe Manchin, to be against it. And so President Biden had to drop it from the original BBB. And then it came up again in the House of Representatives in a bipartisan bill where the Republicans agreed to get some business tax cuts. They would also agree to an extension of the child tax credit, which the Democrats thought was a victory. But I said, business tax cuts are fine, but why are we undermining this principal tenet of welfare reform? And so we defeated it again. The Senate didn't pass it. And so now it'll be an issue in the current campaign. Vice President is talking about it. The confusing thing, I hate to do this, but it's important to know, is that there's an element of the conservative world that believes in expanding benefits to struggling people. And they like increasing tax credits to families that they think need more government assistance. And they're willing to get a tax benefit for middle-class families in return for giving an additional cash benefit to poor families. And I think that's a mistake.
So, Robert, thanks again for coming. I just want to clarify, because I've heard you lay out the
Yes.
purpose for the work requirement in several different ways. I've heard you talk about it in terms of improving the material circumstances of poor people.
True.
I've also heard you talk about it in ways it sounds like there's a psychological or a cultural sort of gain. How do you, I mean, if I were to say Robert's position on why to do work requirements is to make the following impacts on people who are poor or near poor, what would it be?
Well, it would certainly would be a way to acquire income that raises the financial well-being of the family. So I don't disregard that. That's important. And it also brings it with it that it's earned, that there's the dignity of your work. But there's also an enormous amount of communal benefit by being in the community, by having a responsibility, by seeing other people, by getting out of your house and your network. And then there's the example you set for children, your children, that I remember in New York City. You have to understand, I grew up in Brooklyn. My dad was brought to Brooklyn by Robert Kennedy to run an anti-poverty program in Bedford-Stuyvesant. That anti-poverty program in the 70s wasn't very successful because it was overwhelmed by the cash welfare system that had been done, that in my opinion did great damage. It's also overwhelmed by some other things, but it was not successful. And so I saw the city when there was a cash benefit and families didn't work and there was no real expectation of work. And the city struggled. And when we imposed a work requirement, it wasn't so much that we took people by the hand and got them a job. It was that they saw that that was the expectation and they had the capability themselves. It's also an expression of belief in them. I mean, we thought they had potential. And so they went to work in the hundreds of thousands. Labor force participation for never married mothers went from 40% to almost 70% in the United States and in New York. That's an enormous achievement that led to better outcomes for kids.
So you mentioned at the top that material improvement is a central goal here. But just take the earned income tax credit.
Yeah.
The folks who disagree with your position point to the fact there was a 40% decrease in child poverty in direct response to that child tax credit. So are you saying then that there's a kind of a hierarchy here?
Well,
that you put a higher value placed on what you see as the cultural or psychological impact, and if there isn't the same level of material impact because the children now slip back into poverty, then that's just the cost.
No, I first of all, the 40% statistic is the measurement of poverty is complicated and it's problematic. We've happened to think that Bruce Meyer and Andrew Sullivan, Bruce Meyer at the University of Chicago, Andrew Sullivan at Notre Dame, do the best work on this. And we don't think that necessarily the statistics you just quoted recognize the impact of other benefits in the household or the very significant underreporting in Census Bureau survey data. So I don't really accept your premise on that. And then the second thing I would say—
do you not accept that earned income tax credit did contribute?
No, but
maybe it wasn't.
But Larry, the earned income tax credit's always been in place, and it delivers $7,000 to households with 2 kids, and has been, and I've always supported it. The child tax credit, which was implemented during COVID, was a different thing. And so the earned income reduces poverty. We know that.
Sure.
The child tax credit added a little extra material benefit in the household. And during COVID, when there was no work, you could maybe have an explanation for why, but that was a temporary time when there was no employment, when the government shut down all employers. I don't disagree with that. But when there are jobs, we need people to move into employment. And the benefits are not only the material benefit, but also health benefits, the example they set, and the outcomes. There's a lot. This Raj Chetty work is significant. It's showing that kids raised in households where there's employment are doing better in escaping poverty. Why doesn't that close the deal right there?
So you're citing studies, but there have been important peer-reviewed studies.
Raj Chetty's work is, I assure you, peer-reviewed. He's not an AI.
I certainly know who he is. But there are, several studies coming out of Columbia who've looked at the benefits and costs around the child tax credit. and they say it's 10-1. Now, I don't want to get into a
Yeah.
hair splitting, but my point here is really just the basic one. If you're told and you accept to some level that there is a material benefit from the child tax credit, is it enough to say, because what I hear you saying, there are these two things, but what I really believe you're saying, well, one is the
Health
cultural,
outcomes for children.
one is the cultural set of norms about work is important, being part of the community. I mean, you've said that.
I like that, but I look at the
and then the-
measurable outcomes.
And the
even
second
more.
part is in terms of poverty
No,
and material
but
conditions.
you're ignoring health outcomes, outcomes for children, school participation, less crime. There's a lot of statistics on the benefits of a community that has a lot of work in it over a community that doesn't. And I would just say there is one other thing that my experience as a social service administrator does play a role here. And I wrote about this and it got some attention. If you're sending a check from Washington to a struggling low-income family, single mom, not the greatest high school or education performance, and maybe some issues. And that check comes from Washington, and it relieves the material hardship, maybe even reduces poverty as you count income. But it also can keep her in her home with the shades drawn. And there's no need for her to engage in the community, in the organizations in her community that provide aid. There's no need for her to go to an office and have her have to sort of, there is a social worker aspect of this for me. There's a benefit for all of us to seeing what's happening in families who are in need so that we can better help them. If you're just sending a check, there's an element that will just keep those issues unattended to.
Mhm.
And that's also a bad thing. And so anyway, that's,
Yeah.
and I should also just say one thing, Larry, just so we're clear. The last thing, maybe you don't like this last point. Most Americans want to support a program that incentivizes and encourages work over a cash dependency.
Sure.
And so that's why the Democrats don't call it what it is.
No, sure.
And,
That's
because
the
they don't
case.
want people to know.
But
that's what they're
there's
doing.
also a lot of support for programs that contribute to improving the material well-being. And some of these work requirements have had damaging effects. I mean, they may be aimed at the breadwinner in the house, but what are the effects on the children? What are the effects on the
So,
disabled?
Larry, I watched that I implemented this in New York City. I do care about poor,
Oh.
low-income Americans. So we watched food insecurity. I was the chair of the National Hunger Commission. We watched hunger. We watched foster care placements.
Mhm.
We watched outcomes for attendance at schools. None of the horror stories happened in terms of the data. There
That
are
you saw.
tragedies in American life. That's true. But if you run a social services system that is determined never to allow any bad thing ever to happen to one family, you won't really help the most of the families.
And just to be clear, I'm not making a point based on anecdote. I'm talking about dozens and dozens of articles by, scholars. I mean, people are watching it who are some of those scholars, and
No,
and,
I mean,
and
I've
they're gonna take exception to you saying, here are the anecdotes from 20 years ago when based on national studies.
Listen, I've been doing this a long time. The chair of the economics department, very much a person who you would not consider a conservative, looked at outcomes for children among the poorest Americans in the post-welfare reform period and found that among the poorest, they did better. So there's not, there's the one issue, which I frankly, even that we could go around and around on, is homelessness. And even there, I just don't know if there were really very good stories about how work requirements in the TANF program, good research, did damage to poor families in America, and they would have done something about it. But it's not there. It's really what it offends in people is they don't like the theory of the paternalism of it.
I think there are people like that for sure, but there are also people who are empirical scholars.
I know them all.
From
I'm sorry to be, but it really it's a good discussion to have, but I really think the researchers,
well, let me ask you about another area. which is work requirements in the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, particularly the Medicaid expansion. Because we've seen that. We've also seen, and I know you support state and local control as much as possible. We've got 10 states that have not adopted the expansion, and there's very strong empirical evidence about the impact on health and longevity.
Yeah, so I ran the eligibility program in Medicaid in New York City when I was commissioner for 7 years. As I said, we achieved an uninsured rate for children of less than 5% before the Affordable Care Act. I believe in public health insurance for low-income Americans. The 10 states that haven't taken the expansion, I don't know what their specific circumstances is, but that's not where I come from. That's not the view I would take. The concern, however, I have, again, this comes from my social services caseworker background, is that you're providing a health insurance card so someone has the security of getting health care for themselves and their children. And when you do that, they say to you, the reason I need this from you is because I'm not working. And this is happening hundreds and millions of times in the United States. And the Medicaid program is by far the biggest of all these programs. And we have that opportunity to engage that person in some effort to help them get into employment. And I feel that that's a missed opportunity if we don't take advantage of it. The position of the Medicaid program has been on this matter is not our job. We don't do that. We just give the card and say, see you in a year. And I find that to be a lost opportunity. And so I do support a lot of experimentation at the state level. I believe in the federal, state, local partnership. So I'm not a total state, local control person. But if some experimentation of that involves a state agency saying we want to engage Medicaid recipients in job training or required attendance at a program that will help them get a job, because we think employment is got health benefits too, which it does. I'd want to support that because I want to help families move up, not stay in a circumstance where they are entirely dependent on their resources on the federal government.
The entitlement reform generally is getting a little more attention than it has in the past. And my view is that it needs to have a lot of attention. Are there entitlement reforms that you think are particularly helpful, or conversely that might save money but that would be particularly harmful?
So I'm a little surprised you say that, Vin, because the position of the leading candidate of the Republican Party is that entitlements are to never be touched.
Yeah.
And that was one of the 4 tenets of his campaign.
The only thing he and Biden agreed on.
Yeah. And so I actually am frustrated in Washington at the extent to which there isn't a lot of attention on that right now, and the debt and the deficit is not being concerned about. However, having said that, I'm cognizant of the fact that whether it's Medicare or Social Security, a lot of Americans who worked all their lives feel they paid into that and they are entitled to the return that should come from their contributions. And when you raise the issue of reforming entitlements, it sounds to them like you're going to cut their benefits. Yeah. And so I think what Republicans learned is that's true. I mean, that's true. And Paul Ryan kind of took it on the chin, and Donald Trump became the president of the United States. And so having said that, we have a scholar, Andrew Biggs, and another scholar, Mark Warshawski, who write about little changes to the actuarial tables that over time could make them more fiscally solvent and wouldn't really lead to any significant change. Maybe even, that I noticed that, President Trump, I think, came out very aggressively. We're not raising the retirement age under any circumstance. So I think we're just going to have to face up to it. But apparently we haven't hit the point where the cost of what we've committed to for
Yeah.
seniors is more than we can afford. And it remains the third rail of American politics. And, you know, if Vice President Harris wins and the Republicans win the Senate, there's a chance, because of the cost and the size of the debt and the deficit, that there'll be some effort to look at those, but it's not really alive right now.
I agree with that. I should have, instead of saying there is more talk about it, maybe I should have said there should be more talk about it.
Yeah.
You know, and I would go way back into ancient history. In 1986, we did pass a reform of the Social Security laws.
Yes.
It did reduce the growth of Social Security benefits over the long term, and there was no voter rebellion against it. The problem we've had, it seems to me, is that both President Trump and President Biden and other political leaders for the last few years have convinced the American people that any talk of entitlement reform does mean shoving grandma over the cliff.
Yeah.
And they don't understand that there are the modest reforms that
Yes.
you referred to that would save us a huge amount of money over the long term.
Yeah, just so people, I know everyone here understands this, but this is the thing about the healthcare programs. They're really expensive.
Yeah.
And so to give you an example of that, in New York City, and the ratios still remain in place. Federal, state, local, New York City is a city of 8 million people. We spend $30 billion a year on Medicaid, that is health insurance for poor New Yorkers. We spend less than $1 billion on food assistance, less than $500 million on employment services, less than $500 million on childcare. And to me, that balance is a little bit wacky. When I would go and testify before the state legislature on issues concerning childcare aid or work programs or child support enforcement, it would be me and a few scruffy advocates. And we'd duke it out and we'd see where we'd end up. But when it was anything having to do with the Medicaid program, it would be me and the most powerful lobbyists in New York. And they're a huge, it's a huge expenditure. And in both Medicaid and Medicare, that is, in my opinion, not well managed. And now the big challenge in AEI is that the traditional conservatives' view is, well, we have to get government out of it and allow for opportunities for choice, market competition, greater openness and transparency on prices and all that. And I see that. I see the theory of that. But we've been fighting that fight for a long time and we're not winning, and government runs the show. I might like a little more effort on the part of Medicaid at CMS, the agency that runs the programs, to police the payments and watch because, you know, waste in Medicaid and Medicare doesn't go to struggling single parents or poor families. It goes to the health industry. And that's a problem.
And just to give some facts on that, the FBI and the Justice Department have been going after these fraudsters, and the sums are extraordinary. We're talking billions of dollars that are being built. So I think that's an area where you're absolutely right.
We agree on that one.
We absolutely agree on that, because I think it's the vested interest, the providers and the equipment makers and so forth. Let me ask you another question. For you, you're not like a small government conservative. You see plenty of roles for government. One of the things you've been talking about is EITC, the Earned Income Tax Credit. And this has been around. It was really boosted under Republicans. But there's a lot of Republicans today who see it as too expensive, riddled with misuse, and maybe a cause of inflation. What do you say to them?
Well, they're not very effective because the EITC, if you chart it over time, has grown and grown and grown. It's also very popular at the state and local level, including among Republicans. So many places, I bet in Minnesota can have a federal EITC. There can be a state EITC. I pushed through a state EITC for non-custodial parents when I was in New York State. So, I would say, now, having said all of that, the one issue with the EITC and any program or programs run by the tax department, the revenue agencies, is they don't do a very good job in making sure that there's payment accuracy. And so there's a 20% or 18% payment error rate in the EITC. Last I checked, and I'm pretty sure that's still true. And that's a problem. That's a lot of money that's going to families that aren't eligible. If that was the truth in SNAP or in any other social services run program, we'd be having to fix that. But because the tax department is run on a idea that you trust and then you pay or you approve, and then maybe if you find out later, you do something about it, and they have very rapid, you file your return, you have to get your refund pretty quickly. They're tough. And so that's just the sort of what you gotta pay to do business. And there's Republicans who raise that issue, I think are raising a valid issue. They've raised it for many years. And they've made no headway in reforming it.
We've got a bunch of questions here from.
That's absolutely true.
We've got a bunch of questions here from folks who are with us here at the university, but also online. One question says, there's a lot of conversation about work, and where's the conversation about employers? Because employers are employing large numbers of people who rely on SNAP and Medicaid and more. Where do you stand on a minimum wage and benefit requirements that could improve the employment status, the material well-being of those who are employed by private sector?
So, I'd said I believe in requiring work. I believe in rewarding work. And another thing I believe in is promoting a strong economy. If you're in social services, if you're in any program that's helping low-income Americans, you're just in a better place if the economy is strong and employers are hiring. So I honor employers and really love them in New York. And Mayor Bloomberg's view was every job is better than no job. And we had a high local minimum wage, and I don't really object to that if the market can absorb it. So I'm very pro employers. I also should say the best training, the best human capital development takes place inside employers. So I like them. The reason we have chosen to support subsidies for low-income workers in the form of EITC over a higher minimum wage are twofold. The first is, rather than make the employers pay the full burden of helping struggling Americans by paying higher wages, we've shared the burden among all of us as Americans. And I like that idea. And the second is the more common one that's cited, and that is higher minimum wages reduce entry-level opportunities for struggling, less educated Americans. And, if you're working in New York City or in the southern tier of New York or the far north country, and you have people that are really struggling to get into the workforce, and a higher minimum wage makes the employer no longer want to hire people, which does happen, that's not good. And so I prefer this joint effort, this common effort to help struggling Americans get into the labor force and not put all the burden on employers.
Milton Friedman always said, the minimum wage never changes. It's always zero because that's what you get paid if you don't have a job. And that may be sort of flippant, but there's truth to that, to your point, Robert.
You've also supported community covenant policies and employment subsidies. And, those policies, again, and I say this with respect, because it looks to me like you're dealing with reality.
Yeah.
That you've got to provide a way to share the cost that employers are picking up to hire workers, some of whom may be, don't have the skills they need or may not have the habits of regular workforce participation. But it's, again, what's interesting about what you've argued is this is not government versus the private sector. You're looking at ways in which they kind of work together.
Yeah, I mean, AEI is definitely, we're right of center, we're free market, but we're not anti-government, we're not Cato, we're not extreme libertarian, and that makes us at odds with some people, but we've sort of, the phrase is we've made some peace with the welfare state. But my view, I mean, I can remember when I was with Mayor Bloomberg in the town hall in the South Bronx, and people raised the question about what are you doing for struggling families, and my looked over to me and I said, we've got this, but the key is if you work, we will help you. And everybody in the crowd nodded their head and said, that's a fair deal.
Got a couple questions here about poverty in rural parts of the country. We've talked a lot about poverty that seems to be focused on urban areas. What do you have to say for rural parts of America that are stuck in poverty?
Yeah, so this is a harder one for me because so much of what I believe in is dependent on opportunities for employment. And if there are parts of the country where there are just no jobs, I want to be helpful to people that struggle, but I also think it's not a bad thing to encourage people to move to opportunity and to go where there is opportunity. In the history of the United States, that was what people did when things got, tight or difficult. They moved to where there were opportunities. And I know I can't cite the specific study, but I think there's several studies that have shown people that move to opportunity do better than people that stay. So, I encourage economic development initiatives to bring employers to places in the country where there isn't rural opportunities. AI, just so everyone knows, our commitment to not letting anybody, let me say it another way. AI scholars who focus on agriculture are very strongly opposed to the generosity of agriculture subsidies in the United States because they feel that it's kind of a welfare for ag. And that hasn't been successful either, by the way, Ben,
No.
changing that. But so, there's transport. Sometimes in rural areas, you need to improve the transportation system so people can get to employment. You got to invest in the education systems in those communities. If there's lots of, right now, we happen to live in a time when pretty much the labor market is pretty tight and there are opportunities. And I would not want to ever say to people that moving to where the odd jobs are is an option they shouldn't take.
So we've got several questions here, kind of going into greater depth about work.
Sure.
One asks about what your recommendation is for Americans with disabilities. Would a work requirement pose a particular burden on those Americans?
So all of what I've been talking about, it regards able-bodied Americans who are adults, and non-seniors. So the issue, I don't impose work requirements on programs that serve disabled Americans. Having said that, in New York City, under Mike Bloomberg, we set up a program where people who came in and said they couldn't work because of some mental or physical disability or problem, we sent them to the best diagnostic care they could get to find out whether that was correct. And if they were truly eligible for the federal disability programs, we helped them get that. If they could work in a limited way, but not fully, we would try to help them with that. And if they really could work, we said, no, you got to go back to the work requirements. So I recognize that those issues need to be addressed, but they need to be addressed carefully. I would just say that of all the programs we've talked about, the SSI disability programs are the ones that I think are the most problematic with regard to serving Americans. In New York City, I would say 75%, maybe more. I think this is true in many cities, of the people that you see on the street, street homeless, are also recipients of an SSI check once a month. So that means they're in the system, they're in a government program that's sending them aid, and that's all they're doing for them. They're not engaging them. They're not getting them on a path to being healthier. They're not encouraging them to go to work.
Not dealing with mental health problems.
They're not dealing with mental health problems. And so there's like a classic example of a cash aid. I acknowledge the work requirement or work expectation would need to be different and graduated or carefully implemented, but there shouldn't be nothing. And when I would go, when I was commissioner in New York City and meet with homeless SSI recipients, we would talk about this, and they would say, I would like to work, but I'm not allowed to, because that's the rule of the federal disability system. If I go to work, if I earn anything, I will be completely cut off. And to me, that's just wrong. But again, it's a federal program. It's in Washington. They have very limited caseworker capability. They do nothing. They just send a check.
Well, Robert, we're grateful for the conversation about poverty, which we could continue. We have a lot more, but since you're here and you've been talking about the importance of AEI and your role in the kind of conservative movement, it seems like a good opportunity to broaden the conversation. And we'd be curious your thoughts on the following question. Based on conservative values, is Donald Trump a conservative?
I don't really think so. And I don't really think he calls himself a conservative in the classic way that, William F. Buckley.
There was an exchange when he first ran for president. I can't remember who, but he responded to somebody, remember, it's the Republican Party, not the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
And that was telling to me about his own ideological predispositions.
And President Trump is from New York, so I've observed him before he went into presidential politics, and he's supported Democrats and been a full-fledged participant in expanding government in the most dramatic ways he could. So, and he's against any kind of reform and entitlement. So I wouldn't say that he was and he's also a supporter of industrial policy, and most conservatives are very uncomfortable with protectionism. So I wouldn't call him a conservative. He's a populist, but he's not a conservative.
Does that concern you in terms of the agenda that AEI is committed to?
Well, remember, AEI is not committed to an agenda. We're committed to a sort of a perspective, a way of seeing the world, and we're committed to letting our scholars participate in the public in the most vocal and positive way possible. But yes, for traditional conservatives, President Trump's been a challenge. And there's 4 issues, and I want to say a challenge in both a good and a bad way. So traditional conservatives, Milton Friedman, others, are pretty much free flow of labor and goods across borders. So we were pretty open. Immigration's been great for America in so many ways. So we were kind of asleep at the switch on the fact that there was a tremendous amount of illegal immigration going on, and the system was being abused. And Trump woke us up to that. And that's a legitimate thing to do. We're still pro-immigration, but we have to recognize that there need to be some rules that are followed. Trade. We're free traders, no doubt about it. It's been a net positive for the economy. It's brought 1 billion people out of poverty around the world, no doubt about it. But China abused the free trade agreements and abused the global markets, and it doesn't play fair. And President Trump raised that issue in a good way. Conservatives have always had a nationalist component, so that's actually consistent with a conservative view of being pro-American. On entitlements, we've already talked about, and then on foreign wars, conservatives have always had a long tradition, especially in the Midwest, of being reluctant participants in the world crises and reluctant warriors. I think in the wake of the 9/11 disaster and attack, we got into wars in the Middle East that didn't go as well as we wanted them to go, and looked like it was an example of American overreach and American arrogance. And if that was conservative in one way, it really wasn't consistent with what I think we should have seen the world, how we should have seen the world. And so I just would say that the conservative world's got some discussions to have in resolving these disputes. And I think there's a way to find the right place that poses a very good contrast to whatever is happening on the left.
I would say my observation of Trump is that you cited a number of issues that he really cares about, and they don't really fit well into a conservative agenda, protectionism and the other things you talked about. But from a conservative standpoint, when you're talking about issues that he doesn't have a deep commitment to, he usually listens to the right. That's my opinion of how we got the Trump tax cuts I was basically written by Paul Ryan when he was in the Congress. It's really much of the Trump deregulatory agenda. I think he became a believer in a deregulatory agenda, but it was generated again out of Capitol Hill from conservatives there. And that's how we got the conservative judges on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, those are all good. Those are
And
all true.
but I think when it comes to foreign policy and national security, this has been an area of real tension. I mean, Ronald Reagan talked about peace through strength, and you've got a large number of Republicans in Congress who are opposed to, standing up to Putin. And we've had Vin and I, speakers who are national security experts and have warned that China's watching. If the Republicans continue to block funding for Ukraine or Trump is reelected, then China is going to feel emboldened to go into Taiwan.
Yeah, so AI scholars are very active in that debate. The foreign and defense policy scholars were very active in the discussion of the Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan aid bill. We had a lot of opportunity to talk to members of Congress. The overwhelming majority of the Republican caucus in the Senate supported it. And I think the majority of the House Republicans supported it too.
Yes.
So that you're right. There's a contingent that doesn't see it that way. Right now, they're the minority of at least the Republican office holders at the federal level. But that debate's going to go on.
The dilemma, though, I don't want to get argumentative on this point, but the dilemma is the Democrats are loudly more supportive of aid to Ukraine, but not of increasing the defense budget. And that's an inconsistency that cannot go on for very long.
Vin and I are admiring of an article by Walter Russell Mead earlier this week in the Wall Street Journal. And one of the theme of this article is that World War III is becoming more likely in the near term, and the U.S. is too weak either to prevent it or, should war come, to be confident of victory. What's going on here? It's
a chilling article.
Yeah, Walter is a great friend of ours. He's not an AEI scholar, but we still are one of our great friends. He's at Hudson. He's right. The defense budget in the United States does not meet the responsibilities and the demands and the strategic objectives that we have, and match our adversaries. And so China, Iran, Russia, and North Korea less so, but those three principally are a real problem, and we're not ready. And the next president is going to have to face up to this and figure out how to get the necessary resources, or we'll change our role in the world.
And it's complicated in my view. I was on the Secretary of Defense Advisory Board for a while, so I'm not an expert, but I do pay attention to those issues. It would be an easier issue if we simply needed to get an increase in the defense budget. Not an easy issue, but easier. The problem is if we just increase the defense budget, the bureaucracy of the Pentagon is likely to put that money into traditional programs, many of which are not the ones we should be investing in today, like space and crypto and things like that. So you need both an increase in the funding and a reform of the way the Pentagon spends the money.
Yeah, we have had a lot of presentations at AI from emerging defense technology companies using artificial intelligence in sophisticated ways that are changing the way war is being fought. And there's a lot of feeling that the Defense Department is way behind in facing up to that, and still is sort of committed to, another aircraft carrier and a certain kind of traditional military tools. I have a son who's a first lieutenant in the United States Army, and they're playing around with traditional stuff when drones are fighting the war.
And what is going to be the source of that change? I mean, I look in Congress, and it's not an oppressive group of people who understand the new technology, where it's going. As you know, members tend to lock in on defense systems based on their implications for their districts. I mean, there's a political economy here that is pretty resistant to change. So you've got a collapse of the kind of politics around defense spending as, frankly, pork, You've got these urgent issues that Walter Russell Mead is raising and that bipartisan study groups are pointing out.
Yeah.
How do we get the change so we get the Defense Department that actually defends America?
Well, on that one, Larry, there are some leaders, Mike Rogers in the House, Senator Wicker in the Senate, who I think are trying hard to. Senator Wicker put out a big proposal that matched some of what Walter Russell Mead and was certainly informed by his work and our work. On that one, the easy answer is we need a new president, and that we need the Defense Department change of that nature needs to be led by the executive branch, and that's where I think we're going to get it if we're going to, in my opinion.
I agree with that, and it filters down to the people. I mean, the right Secretary of Defense could make a big difference. That's not always the truth. Cabinet agencies and the president's has the ultimate responsibility, but a Secretary of Defense that truly understood it could lead that community toward reform in a substantial way. Bob Gates was the best Secretary of Defense that I can recall.
We served Democratic and Republican presidents.
Yes.
So, you look at the perilous situation that's described by Walter Russell Mead. This is not, I know we're in election season and it's all Joe Biden's fault, but this has been bubbling along for a while, and it's across partisan administrations. And I think it's, we're coming to a point where the United States standing in the world and what we think of it as is going to be confronted. Perhaps the outcome is going to be disappointing. I recommend this article for anyone who cares
Absolutely.
about.
It'll scare you though.
The word scary is a good one. Well, this has been so much fun, but we've actually come to the end of our hour. And I just want to thank both of you. Robert Doar, thank you so much. Vin Weber.
Thank you.
This has been a terrific conversation. Just want to share a couple upcoming events as part of our 2024 election series. Northwestern's Chloe Thurston's going to be moderating a program looking at the decline of Black and Hispanic support for Democratic candidates and asking whether this is part of a general shift to a more conservative working class sorting into the Republican Party.
Who's the speaker on that?
It's a panel.
Okay,
Chloe Thurston is the moderator.
great.
One of our scholars, Rui Teixeira, is the leading
Yeah.
documenter.
So
of
I've
that.
been trying to get Rui to come out.
Yeah.
I did get John Judas.
Yeah.
But-
Rui was at CAP,
I-
but now he's at AEI.
Yeah.
So he's great.
Center for American Progress, those of you who don't know CAP.
Sorry.
Yeah.
October 9th,
Okay.
we're going to have Republican campaign consultant Kirsten Kukowski and Democratic strategist Rebecca Piercy with us to talk about what's going on in the congressional elections. They're both fantastic. They're
Mhm.
also, they have a great sense of what this is really about. And so, and have a sense of humor. So it's an interesting and fun conversation. If you are interested in the conversation today, there will be a video podcast posted in about a day or two. We will send everybody who registered that. And if you enjoyed the event, please consider making a contribution so that we can continue to bring this to you. Once again, Robert Doar, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
joining us. Vin Weber, thank you
very
so
much.
much
Thank you,
for
Robert. We
for
appreciate it.
the continuing series. This is not something going on at the university a lot, conservative voices. And we welcome it. You can see this is a lively conversation, but we need to be having those conversations. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.